to AP Psychology. I am about to tell you about Chapter 15, Personality. Personality can be defined as an individual's characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. In this chapter, we discuss the three different types of personality viewpoints known as psychoanalytic, humanistic, and the social cognitive. In psychoanalytic, or the Freudian perspective, Freud proposes that childhood sexuality and unconscious motivations influence a person's personality. In order to discover these motivations within a person, Freud uses free association, in which a person says whatever comes to mind, and Freud continues to ask questions, dragging it on into a longer strain of thought. Freud also was a definer of the unconscious, in which he defined it as a reservoir of mostly unacceptable thoughts, wishes, feelings, and memories. Throughout this, we can see his iceberg, in which we see the ego, superego, and the id. The ego is at the very top of the iceberg, the only part sticking out of the water. It's a mixture of the superego and the id, which we see every day. The superego is like the angel sitting on one's right shoulder, telling you what you probably should do. And the id is the devil sitting on the other shoulder, telling you what your raw humanistic desires are. Nowadays, we have contemporary definitions of the unconscious, which is just info processing we are unaware of that's always going on in our minds. As we can see, Freud is turning out to be a very important figure in this chapter. He even makes his own psychoanalytic stages of development, in which he describes the stages a child goes through in their personality develops. The first stage, being the oral stage, is from about 0 to 18 months. It's when the child is very dependent on what they feel in their mouth, and they're always trying to grab things and eat them. The next stage is the anal stage, from about 18 to 36 months. This is when children tend to realize that they control their parents via their bowels. So children, when they're mad at their parents, will just go in their pants. In the phallic stage, from about 3 to 6 years, we see boys becoming very interested in their genital areas. That's why we see kids walking around with their hands in their pants all the time. The next stage, being latency, is from about 6 to puberty. This is when the sexual feelings within a person are very dormant. Finally, we come to the last stage, from puberty to death, or in some cases, menopause. That's known as the genital stage. This is when sexual interest actually arouses in a person. The defense mechanisms within this chapter can be very confusing. First, we have repression, in which you banish thoughts from your conscious because they're too detrimental to who you are as a person. Say, being molested at a younger age. You don't want to remember that. Next, we have regression, which is when an individual retreats to an infantile psychosexual stage that comes previous to the one they're in. Say, somebody getting picked on in the high school years starts sucking their thumb like they did when they were 5. Next, we have reaction formation. When you feel a way so strongly that you don't want anybody else to know this, you act completely opposite. Kind of like how little boys pick on the girls they like when they're younger. Next, we have projection, which is you disguise your own impulses by attributing them to others. You like somebody, so you say your friend likes them. Next, we have rationalization, which is a self-justification for doing something the way you did, like saying, oh, everyone's doing it. Next, we have displacement, which is you feel one way towards one person, but you know that probably isn't safe, so you act that way to another person. Like a guy getting intimidated by a bigger guy, he doesn't want to fight, so he goes back to his girlfriend and takes out this feeling on her. humanistic perspective was defined by Abraham Maslow. His self-actualization was the ultimate psychological need that cannot be met until all the others are achieved. Well, he defined the others in his pyramid, the Maslow pyramid. The first tier of his pyramid was the psychological tier, which says that we need our health to be at its top state, and we also need food and sleep to survive. The next tier, being safety, states that we need shelter and removal from danger to continue living. Next, we have a need for belonging, which is just love and being a part of a group. Finally, the tier right before the self-actualization tier is esteem. We need to receive our esteem from both ourselves and from our peers. The social cognitive approach states that a person's personality is affected by their interactions between other people. Within the social cognitive approach, we have the debate between individualism and collectivism. Individualism states that one's own ideas are above that of the group, while collectivism states that the ideas of the group are more valuable than that of the individual. To talk about one of my tricky spots that I've not yet discussed, we have the thematic apperception test versus the Borscht-Inkblot test. The TAT for short is when an individual is presented with a picture that they are then allowed to elaborate on. Most of them, in this case, would make it have a negative connotation. The Borscht-Inkblot test is where they're merely shown ink blots that have no connotation whatsoever and asked to give their ideas on that.
The end.